Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are logged in from. We are thrilled to be presenting this important panel entitled Welcoming Our Transgender Colleagues in the Law, sponsored by the ABA Commission on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, and co-sponsored by the ABA Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, the ABA Young Lawyers Division, and the ABA Law Student Division. The panel is the first of the Commission's intersectionality webinars, which we hope to turn into a series. For more information, please visit the Commission's webpage. The link will be posted in the chat box. I would like to especially acknowledge and thank Skip Harsh and Marita Reitfeld and Tina Gadea for all of their planning and assistance in this. It's always interesting when you get an email from someone you don't know saying, hey, I saw something else you did. Are you willing to participate in this? During today's program, we encourage you to ask questions of our panelists through the Q&A, not the chat function, but the Q&A function if you have questions you want to submit. If you do not see the controls, please ensure your screen is not idle. We will address questions at the end of the panel as time permits. And we'll be sharing a recording of this program to everyone who is registered so that you can share it widely with your networks. And with that, we're thrilled to bring you today's program entitled Welcoming Our Transgender Colleagues in the Law. I am Judge Zeke Zeidler, Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge. My pronouns are he, him, el. I am a cisgender gay man, and I am coming to you from the traditional land of the Gabrielino and Tongva people. Cisgender means that I was identified as male at birth and I self-identify as male. And today we have a wonderful panel, accomplished panel. One of them is not here yet. Hopefully he will be arriving soon, and that is Kyler Brodus. With us today are Ellie Krug, Ellen goes by Ellie, and Mia Yamamoto. I'm going to stick with first names because I really want this to feel like a chat. One thing I think we've learned in the past year especially is the value of just learning from people's own personal experiences about their lives and learning about different communities based upon the experiences of members of that community. So I'm going to stick with first names for today's chat. And rather than starting with bios and bona fides, I'm just going to start with each of our panelists telling us your own personal story and letting us into your lives a little bit as much as you feel comfortable. So let's start with Ellie.
Thanks, Judge Zeidler, and thanks to the SOGI Commission and everyone else, Skip and Merritt, who helped make this work. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Ellie Krug here. I'm speaking to you from the exurbs of the Twin Cities. I am 64 years old. I have been a lawyer for nearly 40 years. I have the distinction of being the very first Iowa lawyer, first lawyer in Iowa to ever transition genders on the job. I did that in 2009, at a time when I represented two of the most LGBTQ friendly industries in the world, railroads and trucking companies. Although they've come quite a ways since 2009. I don't want to bash the two industries right now. My background is for many transgender people in the profession right now, in terms of, if you want to characterize us as boomers, my background is very similar to many people who have transitioned. I had stuff going on in my head about gender when I was 11 years old. I remember that vividly, but frankly, I thought it would go away. I fell in love with a girl in high school. She turned out to be my soulmate. I got pretty lucky the very first time. And together, she and I tried to build a life together. And it really was, by the time it was over, a dream life that any man could ever want. We ended up having two beautiful daughters, a house in the best neighborhood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I had a very, very lucrative law practice doing transportation trial practice. Tried cases across the Midwest, appeared before several courts of appeal, had a very good reputation as an attack dog lawyer, frankly. But unfortunately, none of that was right for me. And, you know, it's a very long story. Over my shoulder is a copy of my book, Getting to Ellen, memoir about love, honesty, and gender change, available on Amazon, Kindle, or Nook if you want the whole story. I just had to throw that in there. But I tried to suppress greatly. I did, because I really loved my wife with all my heart. And I knew that if this came out, if I came out as Ellie, you know, my true self, I knew that I would lose her. I also knew that I would lose my law practice. I was pretty certain I would lose a daughter and maybe my sister and some other people in my life, including my across the street neighbor who happened to be the federal judge that I appeared before regularly. And so, and we're coming up on the anniversary, and that is 9/11. And on that night of 9/11, I was in church with a whole lot of other Americans. And somewhere in church, I started thinking about what would be my last thoughts on my deathbed. And the very last thought was one that I hadn't expected in my head, which was that I'd be a coward, that I would lay on my deathbed and think that I had been too afraid to be me. And so it was on the night of 9/11 that I ended nearly 3 decades of suppression. And I said, I'm going to go live as me. So all those things that I feared that would happen did happen. But eventually it all turned out well. The daughter that I lost came back. The sister that I lost came back. The law practice that I lost, I ended up going off and doing other things that were more important to me at that time in my life. So, and now what do? I speak and train on human inclusivity and diversity and inclusion. I consult with law firms and legal employers and other entities, governmental entities, about diversity and inclusion, including about how to be welcoming to trans and LGBTQIA2 plus people. I'm happy to say that I have truly found my calling in what I do right now. The last thing I would say is I'm a hopeless idealist, and I believe that we all have an obligation to try and make the world a better place. And that is something that I try to live every day. Now, finally, is me, as Ellie Krug. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And especially, I think it's so hard for any of us to wrap our minds around someone being the first trans lawyer in a state to transition and really being out there in that way. I did take a couple of tidbits from your bio in case you didn't mention a couple of things. Ellie is a columnist for Lavender Magazine and has been for about 10 years, I'd say. And similar to Kyler, if he shows up, they were both named 25 legal advocates fighting for trans rights by Advocate Magazine. And next we have one of my personal heroes, because I've known you for so long, since I would think I was a law student, Mia Yamamoto.
Thank you, Zeke. Judge Zeidler. Always a pleasure to have you be on the panel or any place nearby. And thank you for that, Ellie. It is interesting to be the first one in a state, in a place, transitioning on the job. And that's what I did as well in my own little community of Los Angeles. So I have to say that among the people out here, I know I'm talking to lawyers, hopefully law students and others, that it is really important, as Ellie spoke about, because I know that same epiphany came to me very much later in my life. I was already turned 60 and a surprise birthday party. And I remember standing up and I'm playing the music for this event, and behind the microphone, all these people, I've got to smile and think, I'm an asshole. I'm a liar. I'm a coward. I'm a phony. I am not this person they love. And this is an awful experience. And from that moment on, I came out, I started telling my friends that I'm trans, and started going out into the circles that we have to deal with. You had to deal with family, even sibling, not just siblings, but children. These are struggles in a world where everybody knows in many ways we've never been seen as welcome. As a matter of fact, in many places, in certain cultures, it is seen as the worst possible thing that could happen to a family. And it would be a major way of bringing shame to a family, to community. You got to fight through all of that, stand up and say and tell the truth and live with the consequences, something that you've been afraid to do for far too long in your life. And so it had to come out. So I started with family. Family is the one that has the deepest involvement and investment, and you stand exactly the same as you've always been. There's a level of comfort and security that you're going to take away from them. And that is a traumatic experience for a lot of people that have known you for a long time. I'm 60 years old, and I'm going around talking to people about this, and people are laughing because they figure I'm kidding, because I'm that type of person. I'm always kidding around. Some people are always joking, and I unfortunately am one of those. Some people took a long time for this completely outrageous concept to take hold. Same thing with you, Ellie. They didn't have any transgender lawyers any place in California that I knew about. And there's no roadmaps or role models. And so you got to go ahead and just be yourself. That initial important advice, which always resonates and always has to be true, got to follow your heart. People follow you for advice, and you tell them the same thing. You got to follow your heart. You got to do what you know is right. So I came out to my family, all my siblings. My parents had long gone. I spared them that particular revelation. I'm not sure how that would have been received. I think my dad would have been not so happy. My mom would have been cool, knowing my mom. But all my brothers were not necessarily comfortable with this. It was a very difficult and daunting time. So, but we reached some measure of awkward détente, my siblings and I. I only had one brother, the second to the oldest brother, who decided that he had to disown me. And he went to a sort of a graphic conversation, which I won't share with you here. It was not polite or civilized, and said, "Don't you ever contact me ever again. I'm not your brother. You keep away from my children. You keep away from my grandchildren. And I'm never going to talk to you again." And so I said, well, if this is the last time I'm ever going to talk to you, I want to thank you, because you were the rebel of the family. You were the one that taught me. I didn't have to be what everybody wanted me to be. Thank you. Goodbye. I haven't talked to him now going on 20 years. And it's another form of liberation that you lose people that you love, but you find the people that you didn't realize that you would love even more. And really, coming out, as you well know, is the way to determine who your friends are, certainly who's on your side, and who have some problems coming over to your side and recognizing and acknowledging your truth. So the next level is interesting. When you talk about extended family, they have always been the best. Those are the ones, my nephews, nieces, I've been their hero for a long time through a whole bunch of other things prior to my transition. So that part of it wasn't that hard. Certainly they have been my biggest heroes, my biggest fans. Going through transition, they're my most important partners. Then we got to go to my clients, the most important people to me beyond my family. These are people whose lives, futures are laying on my shoulders, and have a deep responsibility to fulfill my obligation to them, my duty to them, and my spiritual connection with them. So I went to the jails, went down there to talk to my clients, and I had a bunch of tough clients. A lot of them had murder cases, a lot of them were gang kids. I had one death penalty case. And I came out to each one of them individually. And they all said the same thing. They all said, "No shit, you really gonna do that? Oh man." And basically we had the conversation around it. I told them very openly and very directly what I plan to do. And I said, you know, I know this is sort of a bait and switch. I mean, you did hire a guy, but you're not going to get that one in the trial. I'm not going to get that going forward. And so if you have a problem with this, problem with the whole concept of it, I will get off the case. I'll find you somebody else to represent you. I know some of the best lawyers in Southern California. You will be well taken care of. Not a single one of them fired me. And interestingly enough, the next level of disclosure I felt had to do was to the judges. And with all due respect, Zeke, I sent letters to all the judges and I never got a response, not a single response. I mean, you guys are so chicken. So I go into court and, you know, I'm announcing this to people and telling them, but it wasn't until the day that I go to court dressed. And that was the one that was the profoundly distinctive element of coming out transgender. If you're going to come out gay or lesbian, normally speaking, you're going to probably look pretty much the same tomorrow. Coming out trans is much more in your face. And I knew that getting ready to go to court, the first time I had to go to court, I thought tomorrow, I'm going to liberate the criminal courts building. I'm going to show them something that they'll never be able to unsee. They will not be ever able to unexperience. And a whole level of disclosure and openness will come to the criminal courts building. Tomorrow, I'm going to liberate the jail. And I'm going to liberate every single court in Los Angeles County and wherever the hell I go. There's a transgender lawyer in these trial courts ready to try jury trials. Whatever the toughest cases you got, I've tried them already. I can try them again. This whole process, I've always had to feel like it had to be something like that. I described to you the first day I do show up at the criminal courts building in my dress, and all the way from the parking lot, see people I've been seeing for the last 20, 25 years. Eyes are popping, their jaws are dropping. People are freaking out, all the way into the building, all the way to the elevators, all the way up to Department 50. I go in front of Judge Dave Horowitz, and of course, the prosecutor, being as gracious as she is, Vivian Somoza, she looks me up and down. She says, so what do we call you now? And I said, I call myself Mia, and thank you for asking me that question. That's perfect. Going to court, and interestingly enough, like everybody as a judge, they pretend like they don't see anything different. They proceed exactly as though nothing at all has changed. So in LA, I think I had a big advantage. It just so happened that somebody was going to interview me for one of these attorney profiles for the Daily Journal, which in LA is the daily legal paper. And so I told them, I got this one issue that may overwhelm your profile. And they said, well, that's even better. That's even more interesting story. So they put a full page feature out, and it was great. I didn't have to come out to 5,000 people. I could do that all at once. Anybody who's LGBT knows it's like a serial process, and procession continues to this day. And let me just say this, the courthouse was, I think, amazing. I think that article did me a big favor. It explained me to my colleagues whom I've had to work with and worked with joyfully and gainfully for the last these double digits, decades and decades. So in any event, coming out on the job in the courts of Los Angeles, I have to say my experience has been going through my cases, going through the jails, dealing with everybody. I think I have to say, with a few notable exceptions, a few glitches with respect to people, which you might well expect, the people have been amazingly gracious, embracing, absolutely far more gracious and loving than anybody could have ever expected. When you do an unprecedented thing, you really don't have any idea what to expect. And so you sort of expect the worst. You have some amazingly clever retorts to what you think will be the taunts that you will receive, extraordinarily witty responses worthy of publication when you are confronted with bullies. But in any event, it has been, and I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail about it, it's been an amazingly accepting experience. I thank the judges. I thank most of the prosecutors. I love most of them anyway. So that has been my story coming out of the courts of Los Angeles. And I really am grateful for this opportunity to share this with future generations of trans lawyers and trans accepting lawyers out in the community, understanding the necessity to include the contributions that we need to make. Thank you.
Thank you. And, I think in many ways you're so unique because you've been president of the California Lawyers for Criminal Justice. You either formed or were co-chair of practically every single Asian Pacific lawyers group in Los Angeles. Mia actually founded the Asian Pacific Law Student Group when she was at UCLA and formed the Japanese American Bar Association in Los Angeles. It was co-chair of co-chair of Japanese American Bar Association, co-chair of the Asian Pacific Women Lawyers, and founded the Multicultural Bar Association in LA. So I think your experience is unique when you came out as being trans and you transitioned and on the front page of the Daily Journal because of who you already were in the community. Ellie, I'm wondering if you might share a little bit more about the loss of your law firm and what happened with you in terms of the rejection within the legal community.
Sure. So let's go back to 2009. Even though it's just 12 years ago for us right now, for the transgender community, it's about 75 years ago. I mean, things have changed greatly. And, I'm in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, but I had the benefit of a couple of things when I came out. Literally just the month before, the Iowa Supreme Court had decided in a unanimous decision, the Varnum case, Varnum v. O'Brien, in which the Iowa Supreme Court declared that marriage equality was the law of the state. That decision was received very positively by many Iowans and particularly by the legal community. And so with that as the background, I had the luck to, I did not come out voluntarily. I was outed by a client. And so I really had no choice. But on a Monday morning, I just like Mia, I sent a letter out to 200 lawyers, judges, and clients and said, I'm really not a dude, I'm really a chick. Here's what it means to be transgender. And by the way, please don't fire me, but if you feel like you need a new lawyer, I will help you get one. I'm not gonna, shirk my responsibility. And so what I did is I waited to see what would happen. And then slowly came the emails and the phone calls and then ultimately personal meetings. But on that very day, people just started responding. And my colleagues from the bar in Lynn County, Iowa, and in Cedar Rapids, Lynn County Bar, and across the state were unbelievably supportive. I had people calling me, Ellie, and these were people I had that, were adversaries on other cases, although, we got along still and all that stuff, but hard fought cases that I had won, luckily, but called me and like, Ellie, what can we do to help you? Congratulations. I had a federal magistrate send me an astounding email telling me that he had recently tried a case involving a trans prisoner. And he went into the case believing that being transgender is all hokey. That's what he believed. But he said after a week of testimony, he understood that it was real. And he congratulated me. And so the response from the clients for the most part was amazing. I had a railroad client, I just said something about railroads, but I had a railroad client that supported me, that did the very last court appearance I ever had in my legal career was before the Iowa Supreme Court for that railroad. They did not want me to retire. And so everything went incredibly well from that kind of perspective. But my practice, Judge, was one that had high exposure kinds of cases. These were cases where people got killed. I represented railroads and trucking companies. People get killed or violently maimed. Demands were in the tens. of millions of dollars. And I think that many of my clients just got afraid and they didn't want to take the risk to have me. So, and I'm going to stop now because I see that Kyler has come on, and I want to certainly give Kyler an opportunity to share his story.
And before Kyler shares his story, and welcome Kyler, Mia, I know you, when you come out, people contact you. Sometimes it's good and you're my role model and thank you, you saved my life. And sometimes it's sharing with you their bad experiences. I know you've shared about other lawyers who have been in contact with you and the bad experiences that they've had when they've transitioned. Can you at least share about that a little bit before we have Kyler introduce himself?
Oh, I had, before I came out, before I transitioned, I called around the country. This was in 2000, I guess, 2001, someplace around there. I remember checking out other lawyers around the country who had come out of the job and in the community. And man, I heard some pretty tough stories. I mean, people lost all their cases, clients lost their marriages. There's a lot that is risked coming out. And so, I mean, I certainly, like Ellie, I was like blown away by the reception I got from the profession, the bar, the bench, my organizations. Everybody was amazingly supportive. I got to be able to get married. A whole bunch of things that have come in the wake of transition that you would never expected and certainly had no right to expect. I don't think anybody to the kind of receptions and the kind of embrace that we've received. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I think often it's so interesting because you never always are correct in what you assume people's reactions are going to be. And so often, you mentioned that you think your mom would have handled it well, but your father wouldn't have. But I know so many people who they come out as gay or trans to their totally liberal parents, and those are the parents that end up freaking out. And I know people who have come out expecting to be totally shunned from their fundamentalist family, and that family has embraced them. And I think so often it's hard for us to ever really know how each person is going to react. Kyler, welcome. Mia and Ellie each kind of shared their own personal story, and we had moved on to then just kind of the experience of lawyers transitioning. But maybe you could share your personal background to the extent that you'd like to with everyone. And you're muted.
I certainly can. I must have came out before they did because I didn't receive all the love and affection in the legal community. So, but I'm glad they did. So, but on a personal level, when I came out, coming out was still not a great thing, but I listened to my heart and I was long ready to come out because I've always looked pretty much the same. I felt the same. I've dressed the same, but my parents did not know. And I have to do a split in that. My father was not a man of many words, but there's a bond we had that I think you just knew. So, and he became my secret buddy in knowing and my secret protector. And glad he was, because his partner, my mother, was much more, rigid with roles and responsibilities of how people should look. And also being Black in America, people get tired of hearing that, but the standard to be Black in America was also to assimilate, to not draw attentions to oneself and be different. And that was my mother's concern, having talked to her in later years. So she was worried about assimilating, not being different or being killed, because my parents grew up in a very different time than I did, which was fortunate for me and not so fortunate for them. So when I understood that her things were to try and protect me and not to control me or to try to prevent me from transitioning into who I was, I then understood a little bit better. But I've always known that I was trans. I even understood before I could speak, when other people could speak the words to me, I would be very irritated as a child. And once I could talk, I would tell people, no, I'm not a girl, stop calling me that. So, which was much to the dismay of my parents because they didn't want a rude child. Uh, so then that began, but the problem was finding literature because, of course, I didn't grow up in that day of the computer. And then when I could find information that was helpful, and I'll kind of shorten the story, I finally found something that wasn't about Christine Jurgensen because that didn't resonate with me. And even then, there was nothing about any trans people of color, so that didn't resonate with me either. But the closest I could get was Billy Tipton. And Billy was a musician. I actually was a musician at the time, still am. That's the closet part of me. And so that gave me something to live for at the ages of my preteen and teen years, because I was a musician. So that helped me pull through. But my actual transition, which is really hard to say, because when my wife would bring home people and she would say she was married to a woman, they would look all over the party for a woman and they never found one. So, in their eyes, but me. So, that's the long story short. I began to transition in during my time. It was early, which was my late 20s, early 30s. And I was done. And so people would wonder when I was going to transition, which I laugh at now because I'm like, I'm there. So, so, and that would happen a lot. So, so that's pretty much the story. My family was supportive because I had been, you know, this way all my life, whatever this way is, but presenting a masculine front. And you know, didn't really like when my mother put me in those dresses. Those are the worst days of my life. You'll see pictures of me just crying and screaming like, when is this over? When is this over? So that's the main torture she did. Sorry, I always have to have a little humor. So thank you, Zeke, for playing along. So was that the part I was supposed to update everybody on, Zeke?
That works for me. One question I have is, so you were in your mid-20s. Was that before law school, during law school? What stage of your
Oh,
legal career was that?
oh, that was after I had completed law school because I had no stomach for trying to do that in law school at the same time. The fear of that. And I was very quiet. I tried to blend into, as we talk about, all M to S at the time, into the woodwork and not be noticed. And I could feel the hate of people just looking at me then because I didn't fit in a box. So I didn't want to endure any more of that. So it was after law school. I'd worked for a few years, and the world was very sexist, and I had to wear dresses to work, and that took a chore to get up every morning. And my girlfriend would say, "This is your uniform, put it on," and I would go through that. And then as soon as I could get out of the building into my car in the afternoon, I was ripping off clothes like Superman or a Superwoman or whoever, but I was ripping off the clothes as quick as I could. So, because it was miserable. So, and it would be my late 20s when I started doing that because I didn't think that anybody would employ me and allow me to transition and do the things I wanted to do. And pretty much that was the story of my life, but at least I transitioned and did the things I wanted to do in a way that I wanted to do. So that, thank you for giving other people a timeline. We sort of forget when we're in our head, because I don't ever think of a real timeline of transition. I just kind of lived the way I wanted to live.
And for a little background about Kyler, because I did say that I jotted down a couple for each person. Kyler, in addition to all of that, worked on to becoming eventually the founder and director of the Trans People of Color Coalition. He was director of Transgender Civil Rights Project and senior counsel at the National LGBTQ Task Force, legal counsel at Human Rights Campaign, and has served as division director in the ABA section of individual rights and responsibilities. One thing that I am always fascinated with, and I've discussed this with a couple of you a little bit, is in discussing your lives and your backgrounds, the intersection of sexual orientation and gender identity, I think, is so profound, because I first met Mia when Mia was coming to Lawyers for Human Rights, Lesbian and Gay Lawyers events as this, what we all thought was this ally from the Multicultural Bar Association, not knowing that inside Mia was going through this issue of really your identity being a trans woman who was showing up as a heterosexual man to these events. Kyler talks about having actually been identifying, I wouldn't say as a lesbian, but in the lesbian community. And by transitioning, that changes your whole sexual orientation. Ellie, you've had kids in a heterosexual marriage, and I don't know what your sexual orientation is now. But often people so confuse sexual orientation and gender identity, but also don't understand how the gender identity has such an impact on your sexual orientation. In California, when they went to do a survey of judges to identify LGBT judges, they only gave you one choice. You could pick one, and it included gay, lesbian, heterosexual, or transgender. So Vicky Kolakowski had to sit there and pick between being a lesbian or being trans. How much do people ignore that aspect of you and just focus on you being trans and ignore then the sexual orientation aspect of your lives, if one of you wants to take that? I know, Kyler, you and I discussed this a little bit the other day.
You know, if I could just speak to that just briefly, I don't think your gender identity or your sexual orientation is all that fluid. I think it's pretty fixed. As long as I've been transgender, which is probably since forever, I've always, in my growing up male, I love women. I've always loved women. And when I went through transition, I am totally gay. I'm a total lesbian now. And my feeling about women has remained exactly the same. And my gender identity is now revealing itself to be my truth. My truth, though, is absolutely that I don't know, just for me, my sexual orientation remained fixed through beginning to now.
And for me, it's different. And I think I equate this to a journey. I mean, I continue to be on a journey. Things continue to unfold for me. So growing up, initially, I was attracted to, I was identified as male at birth, and I was attracted to females, to women, girls. But when I was in my teens, I started fantasizing about same-sex attractions. Before I transitioned for a while, after I left my wife, I thought I was just a gay man with a panty fetish. That was wrong. But once I transitioned, I did date women for a while, as well as men. So I was labeling myself as bisexual. But of late, and I think pretty much with the way it'll go out, I'm only attracted to men. And, I mean, we don't need to dwell on it, but trying to get a date with this voice is highly problematic, trust me. And so I don't know if there's going to be a man in my life before I call it quits in life, but nonetheless, that's my orientation now. That's who I want to date. Love women, but I don't want to have a sexual relationship with women anymore.
Well, I think it varies, as we've just proven, for each person as to how it plays out. You know, I have my sexual or attraction has stayed pretty much the same. You know, funny, you know, it has stayed the same. And to save time, I won't give any funny jokes as I always do. But I do think that coming out is a journey, as it is with anything. But you know, I'm attracted to women. But I think what Zeke and I had talked about also is the age of, you know, we come out at various ages. We are all a bit older. And I think that, you know, the attraction issue is a little bit easier for younger folks in meeting mates as well, because once you get my age, which is 58, it's a bit hard to find a date, even if you know your sexual attraction. Because it's, you know, I've never used the word straight before, but I'm attracted to women. And generally, that means, especially after I've transitioned, it's harder to date. I find guys in my position and women in my position, or non-binary, because that's not new. That's been around. We just continue to change the nomenclature, but that are of this age that make it more difficult, since we've come out and said the words, more difficult for people to find dates. And I think that we need to be aware of that as well. You know, that the people do want to date me, they're so young. It's like, are you my child? Are you my, you know, it's just like, oh, daddy has to go to sleep now. Sorry for the bad joke, folks, but any chance I can get a joke in, I do. So it's like, no, I have to take a nap now. So sorry. So, and I'm being totally honest about the nap, not whoever the dating person is, because there is none. So because I'm so eclectic and weird and a recluse, that they would have to come into my world to meet me, and that's probably not going to happen. But the issue is a real issue. And I think we have been less generational. And I think part of that for trans people is because now we're kind of, our issues aren't necessarily being addressed or talked about. I appreciate panels like this to talk about them, but these issues do need to be talked about, because we do come out at different ages, but we have things that we go through that are different from being gay. Mia and I both, it sounds like, have lived in the gay world before. Not all trans people have been in the gay world. You know, I was in the gay world when it was spelled GAY, not queer. You know, I still exist in the queer world and do things in the queer world. Not all trans people do that. And I think we have to have an understanding in the LGBT world that that's the way it is, and that not all trans people do that, and not all trans people even understand the gay or the queer world or what that means. And so if we want trans people in, we have to also do education, not just have trans people come in for panels and say, I am trans, this is my nose, this is my face, this is what I look like. And again, I make that a little funny, but it's always like I used to do with people of color panels, and come in and it's like, this is what we look like as people of color. But if you want the exchange, I think it's healthy, and folks do have things for us to come in when it's not COVID, because, you know, even practicing, which I hope we get to, because the era when I practiced was very different.
So, you know, it's interesting because we've talked a little bit about generationally, if you came out, you know, 20 years ago versus, or 30 years ago versus coming out 5 or 10 years ago. But it's also different geographically where you're at. If you're in an area that's more conservative or less conservative, more enlightened, more urban, more rural. You just brought, and we've discussed coming out to your family, and there was a question, and I encourage people to open up the Q&A because some of them are being answered in the Q&A. Some things are being shared in the Q&A in terms of links to different things. One of the questions had been about what are resources for someone whose family member is transitioning or coming out as being trans, and Ellie put resources in there about the about PFLAG. There are resources out there for family members. But you just touched on, Kyler, what do you want people to know about, not just, and we'll get, I think, after this to people who are trans, but about lawyers and attorneys who are trans. What types of things do you want people to understand or know about their trans colleagues, or even about trans people in general? Kyler.
Oh, wow. Well, I think, one of the things is we didn't lose our intelligence because we told you we were trans. And I think that I've seen that happen because I've worked in large corporations of, several 100,000 people to small organizations of 10 people. And I've had that experience of the in-between size too. And what I see people do is when somebody announces trans, the first thing they think is that we've lost our mental state or mental ability. We have not lost that ability to do the job or to act. And so I think that shred of respect that, yeah, we're okay mentally. There's nothing wrong with us. And there's more respect that shows today than there has been, particularly when I came out, that 30 some odd years ago, when that just wasn't the case. But I encounter that now a lot of times from colleagues that make assumptions that I cannot do things. And that happened to me even in my career, because I came out and was booted out of a huge organization. And then Tyler was on his own. And so I get that even still today from colleagues. Well, I must not be able to, because my resume, which I haven't even read, by the way, doesn't say, ABC firm, or they didn't give me the opportunity because it doesn't say what they think it should say. And I think that we have to, as employers, as educators, open that door for people and not be, I'm just gonna say snobs, because we tend to have this idea of only people can have come from Harvard or Yale or wherever. And I've been a professor, and I think people can do, when they are given the right circumstances, they can do the job. And it doesn't matter what school they came from or what piece of grass they grew up on, or even if they grew up on grass, for that sake, if they had grass to grow up on, that people can do the work and do the job. And we need to stop doing that in the legal sense anywhere. And we still do that in some of our major or LGBT organizations, in fact. And so we need to be cognizant of that and not do that. And we need to open the door for trans people that don't have that path, and allow people in, and then allow people grace, and not make judgments just based upon, I love hiding, which is partly somebody is watching this program text me because they haven't seen me, and the beard is part of my hiding thing, and the hair too, because usually normally I have a presence that when I come out, I don't do that. But that's why I love hiding, because I also get tired of being the trans guy in the room or the trans person. And it's like, I like just being a person with everybody else and treated the same with respect. And I'll yield the floor because I realize we have two other folks and time is running out. But there's just a lot of things. Treat us with respect, treat us like people, and then realize that some of us haven't had the opportunities, a la me, because I'm going to say I've been out fighting for rights. So I didn't have time to stop by Yale or Harvard for a degree, but I got a degree while doing all these other things that don't even have room on paper for me to write down for you. So don't kick out on me and think that, wow, this guy is not worthy of a job at your firm or whatever you have. So, or other person. So thank you.
Ellie?
Well, Judge, I just saw a question from someone asking about what advice for young trans lawyers or trans law students. And I have, so first of all, I will say to everybody here who's on here, I have a standing offer that anybody can contact me, and I'm willing to give you at least an hour of my time, and I don't watch my watch, to talk about anything that you're struggling with. And I'm not a therapist, but I listen well, and sometimes I have good ideas. So you can reach out to me at Ellie J, make sure you include the J, ELLIE, Krug@gmail.com. My advice for young trans students and young lawyers is severalfold. First, you got to pick carefully where you're going to practice. If you're practicing in a state where you do not have legal rights, it's going to be infinitely more difficult for you, just as a rule, okay? Because you're going to encounter a bar for the state that's going to be generally less accepting. So if you can pick a state where you have legal rights, by all means do it. Secondly, I really, really stress the ideas of understanding about grit and resiliency, because this is a solitary journey for many of us. Yes, we can be loved by people, and yes, we can have people supporting. I have my best friend since 8th grade has stuck with me. I never lost him. Thank God. He stayed with me the entire time. But still, it's a solitary journey. And never, ever doubt, ever, that you have the grit and the resiliency to make it. You have come this far. You have jumped so many hurdles already. You may not think you have, but you have. And you're still alive. Have compassion for yourself to understand, it's not always going to be easy. And sometimes it's 3 steps forward and 1 step backwards. Sometimes you want to run away, and it's okay if that's what happens. But tomorrow morning, when you get up, remember you got up so many other days. And I swear, and I hope that Mia and Kyler agree with me, it is getting better, and it will get better. And so know that, okay? And lastly, have a therapist, okay? No one can transition without a therapist. I mean, that is my steadfast advice. But even after you've transitioned, don't jettison the therapist. Keep the therapist or a therapist, because they are incredibly important for you as a sounding board and as somebody who can give you honest and sometimes brutal advice, because we need that. All humans need that, whether you're trans or not. Thanks.
I also think one thing to keep in mind is the more of you out there who are coming out, who are transitioning, who are open about it, the more support there is felt by the younger ones coming up behind you. I think coming out has always been the thing that has led to rights, that has led to acceptance, that has led to feeling comfortable in society. We've had 2 trans judges up until 2 years ago, and suddenly we have 4 in the past couple of years. And so the more that people are coming out. And one of the questions in the chat was, when is it appropriate to ask someone if they're trans? And another question in the chat was, have you ever come out to a jury? And I find that interesting. The jury one I find interesting because there's a bisexual, openly bisexual judge in Atlanta. And when he came out, people always asked him, you're married to a woman, you have kids, why are you declaring that you're bisexual? And I said, I sat there in jury trials with jurors being asked about their understanding of sexual orientation issues and about gay and lesbian issues, about trans issues. And I felt like I was sitting there hiding by not being open about who I am. So Ellie, it looked like you just said, yes, you have come out to juries as being trans. What's the context?
Well, so I transitioned genders in May of 2009, and in July of 2009 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, I tried a jury case. And because the voice does not match the appearance, and it was a case over the sale of a house, so my clients were being sued for $100,000 for allegedly not disclosing some defects in the house. I did not want the jury thinking my clients were frauds, and so was I. So I asked the judge, and right before voir dire, if I could tell the jury that I was trans, and get them to promise not to use it against me. The judge, to his credit, I mean, after a long minute of looking up at the ceiling, he came back to earth and said, "Okay, you can do that," but then said to the other attorney, a man who I'd tried several cases against when I presented as a man, if I could, if he agreed, if he would, consent to me telling the jury something personal in Iowa, that would be totally off the table, that you would not be able to disclose something like that without, or in the ordinary course. And the other man, the other lawyer, he could have thought one of two ways. He could have thought, that I would be a fraud, okay, or that it would really taint the jury if I told the jury that I was trans, or he could have, if he was really smart, realized that me standing in front of a jury, and which would have been more than 50% female, that me sharing that was an act of vulnerability that would have actually drawn the female jurors in. To my luck, the other lawyer thought like a dude rather than like a woman. And he said, "Okay, yeah, I have no problem if Ellie tells the jury that." And so when we did voir dire, I got everyone on the jury to swear that they would not hold me against my client. I believed all of them except one man, and we struck him. And it was one of my regular challenges. And we tried the case for 4 days, and I'm happy to report the jury came back in my client's favor. So it is possible to do it. It is possible to show up. I mean, in other instances, maybe if you pass, and passing is the extent no one would ever guess that you were assigned a different gender at birth. If you pass, maybe you don't ever have to tell a jury. In my case, if I ever went back into the courtroom to try a jury case, which the odds of that are pretty slim, but if I did, I'd ask again for permission. And so that's my story. Yeah.
Well, and I may blend, because I'll say that, because I look just like my father and my male cousins, we look alike. But you may not know me, but I don't blend with other people because of who I am and my name. So everybody knows that I'm a trans dude no matter where I go. So I can't just walk into a courtroom, which is what I'm still doing now because of the employment issues I've had. So I just have to make up employment wherever I go. So when I walk into a courtroom, people always know that I'm the trans guy. So, and whether I announce it or not, and early on in my career, and I think Ellie's right, you buy trust by just being yourself, and people will trust you. And so, it used to panic me, but that was eons ago, because you just didn't know how people were going to go. But in some cases, I'll honestly share with you, it's more lethal for me to be Black than it is to be trans. And it just depends on where I am. But it really is. And people, no problem with me being trans, from the mailman to the whoever, but I'll take more slack for being Black. And that wasn't planned because as a rhymer. So, but people will trust you. And she just said it, if you let them know. And it's less and less and less of a problem. So in the courtroom. So I used to be mortified in the courtroom because the other attorneys would talk about me. So,
I think
and the judges. I'm sorry, Mia. Go ahead.
Before Mia goes, I think there's so much. It's so interesting often the intersectionality of issues, because I recently heard a state Supreme Court justice talking about being a Black lawyer, and when they're brought in to just sit there as the Black lawyer in the room to sway a jury on something, just and not even being aware that that's how they're being used sometimes. And it's so interesting, just the difference of when it's relevant that you are trans, that you are gay, that you are Black, that you are Latino as a lawyer in a courtroom, and when you need to make sure that you're addressing the relevance of it. Mia, everything and anything about treatment of trans lawyers, what you want people to know about trans issues, and everything we've been discussing.
Well, I think I wanted to actually talk about what Kyler had talked about in many ways, coming from a Black community is many ways resonant with coming from an Asian American, particularly a Japanese American community, emerging from the camps and trying to find a way to fit into a community from which we'd already been ejected. So coming back with something like a trans kid, any trans individual or LGBT people, anytime in the community you get an intersectional bit of oppression, not just from an accepting society, but a community that's outraged and that you would blemish and taint their image. And so there's, I think, a lot of that. And the other part of it, let me just say, I think with respect to jury trials, I agree. I think you got to disclose it for the purpose of making sure that the jury knows that if you're willing to disclose this much about yourself, I'm asking you to answer some questions honestly with me. And we're going to have to start with that because we're going to be asking you about your attitudes about the law, the case, and all these other things. And so I want to talk to you about it. I'm a transgender woman. Yeah, and there's if anybody like raises an eyebrow with respect to that, I want them to know that because I want that to be out front the whole way because I want to be comfortable while I'm addressing that jury and I'm in the hallways and every place else. So, you know, I laid that out front. I think it's a good idea if you're asking them to open up and be vulnerable and be open and be judged. So I sometimes preface my conversations with them with that. So other parts of it, I think, is part of how we function in the courts, from my point of view, is to be super open. So yeah, I think if you've ever seen the Wanda Sykes routine talking about being Black and lesbian, and there's a whole bunch of different points of view with respect to that, but the intersectionality of the oppression and certainly the targeting, I think needs to be discussed. And I think all transgender people, and I think Ellie, our time is getting shorter, I think she would go with respect to the fact that if we're all here together, the one thing we have seen, the community is capable of amazing embrace of transgender lawyers and transgender law students and aspiring lawyers who want to come, and also the people that are going to be working into a courtroom, hiring lawyers, sitting on juries. The higher profile we are, the most open and notorious we are, which I hope we all are in agreement that is necessary in order to advocate for this cause. I just want to say too, that we are a very minuscule minority who's getting our voice heard, but we are part of a very large movement, and it's called the Civil Rights Movement, and it is blossoming from the struggle for Black liberation. And it has blossomed in ways that have helped the LGBT community, the women's community, all the minority communities, and my community. And it is still subject to the unfinished business, which Black Lives Matter is in the vanguard of this civil rights movement here and now and on the streets of this country. And I just want to make sure that people understand that this is unfinished business for this movement, for the idealists of this movement. If you believe that there should be justice for transgender lawyers, law students, people, then there's some unfinished business with respect to who has gotten us to this point where our voices are being heard. And nobody is going to question that the benefits of the civil rights movement are enjoyed and we have reaped them. And now we've got unfinished business in other places with respect to the anti-Black racism that exists and continues to exist in our communities, in our profession, and on the bench. And certainly in certain prosecutors' offices, I can tell you the residual elements of racism that exist there that work to the detriment of communities of color across this country. So we are part of the same struggle. We understand that it's justice for all, and we're taking a look at why we're here, who has brought us here, who we owe this level of notoriety. And if the difference has got to be made, it's got to be made across the board. And so I'm just saying that with respect to this conversation, I just want to end it with, I hear all this stuff about all lives matter. All lives will not matter until Black lives matter. Thank you very much.
I want to use that to actually transition to talk about being allies, because you just modeled being an ally to the Black community. And there was a question in the chat about how do you let a person know that you're an ally, and I actually want to discuss it a little bit before that, because Ellie, you addressed the person who talked about what advice do you have for trans students entering the profession, and one thing I would add to that is, you know, when I was a gay law student and people asked about being out, my view was, you know what? I don't want to work for someone who doesn't want me as a gay lawyer in their firm. So the advice, one other advice I would give to trans law students is be yourself and be out. And if they don't want you, you didn't want to work there in the first place. There are, you have limited options, and Ellie talked about maybe being in a city that's friendly. But that is something to think about is do you really want to work somewhere where they don't want you? And yes, you can go there, and yes, you can educate them, but that's an issue. So talking about allyship, and Ellie, I know you want to jump in there. The question is, how can people be allies? Two things I would preface with is terminology to begin with. You'll notice throughout this, I've avoided using the term trans lawyer, and I've talked about lawyers who are trans. I have one thing I've learned is to avoid using transgendered as a noun, and instead it is someone who is transgender as an adjective and part of their life. And so one thing is to learn about terminology, and terminology is always changing, and this is a very rapidly changing topic. I remember sitting at a family dinner where my nephew said something using the word cis, and I'm sitting here teaching all these LGBT trainings and had never heard cis before and had to ask him, the college student, what he was talking about. And the other one is the question about how do you let a person know your ally? Just by having your pronouns on the screen on a Zoom, by having your pronouns on your business card, on your letterhead, on your email. That is one way you let people know that you're an ally. It's really important for me to, and you know, you see on the screen, I have my pronouns up. And for me, that's a big part of me showing that I'm an ally, but it's also part of my own identity too. So people know who I am. So Ellie, ways to be an ally and everything else you wanted to jump in on?
Well, so I mean, you're exactly right about language, and I mean, the best way to be an ally is certainly to use the right pronouns as it relates to trans people. I mean, that's the most basic way to be welcoming to trans people is use the pronouns. And I don't have mine on there. Simply, I just didn't get to it for the Zoom, but you know, or she, her, hers. There are a number of companies, and I work with companies around this, organizations that are trying to create pronoun policies. I mean, like formal policies. And believe it or not, there's pushback from some quarters about having those kinds of policies in place. You know, and I always just recommend don't make them mandatory, make them voluntary. And eventually the people that are pushing back will no longer be around. And as younger people come up, I mean, our younger folks are using the pronoun, they're learning this stuff in high school and in college, and for them it's just an ordinary course. But you know, another way to be an ally, and I cannot stress this enough, is to just simply understand that this is not easy. That by the time you are actually talking to a transgender person, somebody who is out, as I said earlier, that person has already jumped through so many hurdles to be there in front of you as their true self. And understand that and give them some grace. You know, I think that we do need to recognize that there may be right on here, right now, on this talk as we're doing this, people who are in the closet, people who are continue to present in accordance with the gender that they were associated with at birth, who are struggling, who are just in there. So they're struggling every day. And I have this saying that human authenticity will not leave you alone until you listen to it. It won't. It will gnaw at you. It will wake you up at 2 a.m. It will yell at you. It will bother your gut. It will make you sick. It will continue to pound at you until you listen to your authenticity. And so if you want to be an ally, understand this thing about authenticity. Understand that it is something, it's not a choice. I mean, that is like, you know, and maybe you're a great ally and you're like, I know it's not a choice, but be prepared when somebody comes to you and says, why do they have to be that way? You know, why are they making us go through this? Why do I have to be in the bathroom with him or her? That type of thing. Be prepared at that time to talk to them about the fact it's not a choice, and that human authenticity shows up in so many ways. Some of us are writers or singers. You know, Kyler, I loved it that you're still a musician. That's part of your authenticity. I mean, I would presuppose, you know, some of us are helpers, some of us are crafters. Michael's is your second home. Some of us are hikers or fisher people. All of that is another form of authenticity. So when you have the person complaining about us, ask them what's their hobby, ask them what turns them on. And then remind them, just say, well, it's just a choice that you go out and hike every weekend. You don't have to do that. And watch how their expression will change. And they're like, oh, that's what you mean. It's not a choice.
And Ellie, there's something else I think that you mentioned in our planning call of something everyone on here could do tonight as a way that they could show they're an ally.
Well, absolutely. And in our planning call, what we talked about, and I was going to say that towards the end, but I'll say it right now. And that is, reach out to somebody today who you know is trans or gay or lesbian or bisexual, and reach out to them and tell them that they matter. Tell them that you care about them. If they're close to you, tell them that you love them. And don't send them a text. Don't send them an email. Call them, or better yet, stand in front of them and tell them that. Because right now, I guarantee you, there are so many people who are other, who feel that they don't matter. And they need to hear that they do, and that they're loved. Thanks for reminding me, Judge.
Thank you. I was worried that we might get to the end, and I knew it would be great. And what you said on our call was, call a trans kid that you know. And that really resonated with me.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
And before we go to Mia and Kyler about ways people can be allies, I think one thing also to know is that sometimes you're going to mess up, or it might just be taken the wrong way. And I've dubbed it recently righteous defensiveness. I actually had an experience which was so uncomfortable, and I was crossing the street and this woman had fallen, and everyone else was walking by, and I stopped to make sure she was okay. And it was a trans woman wearing these high heels. And just as a because I'm very chatty, as you can tell, I said something about, oh my gosh, those heels are, I was saying, do you need help getting up? And I said, oh my gosh, those heels, no wonder. I said, I remember when I was in law school, when one year I wore high heels in law school, it was so hard to stand up. And she looked at me and said, well, that's because you're a man. And I was like, oh boy, I was just trying to like bond and be supportive of this person who had fallen down, and it was taken that way. And know that sometimes either you're not going to get it right, or something might be taken the wrong way, and apologize and move on. Mia, ways people can be allies.
I always suggest the P flag model. If you want to join a group, what I have seen from that group is that the parents and friends, our parents and friends, are actually more effective in achieving societal awareness and change than anything that we have ever done for ourselves. And I found that to be an interesting dynamic, because it is really true, as Frederick Douglass used to talk about this. He used to talk about, I fought against slavery because it was for my benefit. I fought against racial discrimination for my people. But when I advocated for the rights of women, I found some nobility there. It is advocating for those you love rather than for yourself that appears to have much more power and much more effectiveness. And so I really love groups like P-Flag. I met the original people from the Asian American P-Flag from back in the 90s. And I remember their response and talking about, we've got a lesbian daughter and we're so disappointed. We wanted to have grandchildren. So what we're gonna do, looking at this world, we're gonna change the world so it's better and safer for our daughter. And that was their response. And I'm the public defender who used to represent 13 and 14-year-old transgender kids who've been kicked out on the streets by their parents and got to witness the kind of hatred and religious extremism that has caused so much suffering to transgender children. So yeah, I understand what you're saying, Ellie. I've seen a lot of it. It's pretty graphic, it's pretty ugly. It is resonant to the number of transgender women of color who get slaughtered on the streets of this world on a weekly basis. And it is an awareness that people grow up with, and those kids are growing up with that too. And it's scary and it's tough. And I do agree that we have to encourage them somehow, but I think every single one of us, by doing what we do and living the way we do, out front, high profile, is to make sure that they understand there's a world there for them. And there's people out there for them. And we're trying to get that message out to them right now, that there are ways for us to advance, but there's ways for us to advance each other. Like Zeke knows, my thing is coalitions, getting everybody on the same page from a whole bunch of different communities for our singular purpose: justice, equality, inclusion for everybody. This is the shared ideal that we have. We can do nothing for our own little communities, whatever they are. If it doesn't benefit society as a whole, it is meaningless. We have to be contributing to the common good, and that's what we're doing right here and right now, because this message has to go out, that this is not just what we want to do, it's the right thing to do. So yeah, I think allies, PFLAG, I'd like to make a pitch for PFLAG in particular, because I've seen them work really well. And I've seen their legislative efforts and their leadership. I'm knocked out by them, and I would like to just make a pitch for them about being an ally.
Yeah, and Mia, I would add right now, PFLAG is also doing a lot of stuff that's all online. So even if you can't, unbelievably, there's no chapter in the Twin Cities, believe it or not. No PFLAG chapter. There are flag chapters within 50 miles of the Twin Cities, but nothing in Minneapolis or St. Paul. I'm appalled actually by that. But everything is online. And so you can go join a chapter even though you're 100 miles away. And PFLAG is so welcoming to people. I mean, they're just, and many of the chapters, predominantly the parents, the people that are members of the chapters are dealing with, being supportive of trans people. So I just threw that in there, sorry.
Well, and I want to throw in also, because this is being videotaped and going to be available, there are things going on in the Q&A chat that aren't necessarily going to be obvious, and there are resources that have been put in there. And one of the questions in the Q&A that Ellie addressed was from one of my high school classmates who was a public defender in Sacramento. What do DIE groups do other than just that 1 hour training? How do you keep the conversation going? And there was a question about, safe harbor trainings or networking events, speaker series. And Ellie replied that it begins with leadership and modeling, consistent, regular talk about how diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. The judges in San Francisco have actually started a book study. And the judges in Santa Clara County are doing something similar as well. So there are things you can do to have ongoing discussions separate and apart from just a training or just a Zoom formal training of that sort. Someone else had put in the chat a link to a recent article by Heron Greensmith about gender fluidity and non-binary attorneys. What if we weren't born that way? So you can also look in extra XTRA magazine for the article, What If We Weren't Born That Way? One thing I like about having planning meetings is that you say really incredible things there that don't necessarily end up coming out here. Mia, I love quoting you all the time. You said so many incredible things that I've heard in discussing, and this is totally off topic, but in discussing the decision to transition and that it's not a choice, it's something that you have to do. Mia once told me that if she had been born in the medieval times where you couldn't live this way or you'd be killed, she said that she would rather die than to have to continue to live her life, not her authentic self. But Mia, when we talked about things people can do to be allies, you said if you're an oppressor, you need to recognize it and come to terms with it. You need to raise your consciousness. You need to be conscious of the things you're doing in your life. And I think that's an important part of being an ally, is just to open your consciousness to begin with and examine yourself. Kyler, ways people can be allies.
Well, I think those are all very good things, and I do a bit of DEI training in general across the board for various things. And I do think the first thing is to be aware of yourself and what you do or don't do. And if you're not, then if you can't correct any action. And the second thing, which is a point off of what Ellie said, what that I tell everybody to do, is do you have any trans friends or people in your circle? Because if you don't, then you're really missing out. And so besides just making that call or that meeting, then you need to make that develop into a friendship. Because if you don't, then think about what you're missing by not just making it somebody that you connect with, but you need to develop a friendship. You know, I tell that when I talk, use the same thing when I talk about race. We all talk about what wonderful things we know and do, but you need to do a self-assessment for yourself and do that self-assessing to see who's in your, you know, that little pack of friends that you have coffee with or you go out drinking with. Because if they're not in that little pack of friends, then they're not going to be in your life. And I think that's important for you to have people in your life, not that, oh, I just donated at the trans event or thing, and wow, I'm patting myself on the back. Because you can pat yourself on the back all day, but does that propel us into action, which takes us back to Mia's comments of we are really all on the same boat, and we need to be rowing the same way. And if we're not rowing the same way, then we're not helping anybody, including ourselves. And so we need to have that mind, that it's not just mine and my friends in this corner over here. We need to have a group mentality, because it takes all of us to grow and row in the same direction. So if we're not doing those things, we're not trying to grow our own social group to include the people that we have intentionally excluded, whether we want to be aware of that implicitly or explicitly, we've done that to ourselves. So we need to make room for these people. We need to do our own self-education. I don't need to invite a trans friend over and then drain them dry and plug them in and have them tell me everything about being trans. I do that the same with I don't want to invite a Japanese friend over and say, oh, I know nothing about Japanese people here. Let me plug you in and let me download from you everything there is about being Japanese. Nope, 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 nope. I need to get the book. I need to do the reading. I need to do the work, because that person is becoming my friend and I'm becoming their ally. So it's upon me as an ally. An ally stands in the shoes of the other person. So, and I've had many allies that I am going to be proud to say that for the first time, because I've been through the 60s the first time. And when things occurred last year and deaths occurred last year, my phone rang off the hook. And for the first time, I'm proud to say there were allies on that phone that asked me if I was okay and alive during the riots and the gun shed. And those were people, and a couple of them said, well, if you need me, I just learned how to shoot this gun here. And I'm at the range learning how to shoot a gun, because I will stand in your shoes. And a couple of them just said it. Not only because I was Black, but also because I'm trans, and they just said it. And they called me out of love. That's an ally. They will do the work. They're not the person that stands in the corner and says, oh, I love you, here's some money for your cause. Okay? They learn about the people and they do the work with the people. That's an ally. And I could go into a whole bunch more, but Ellie went into a lot of things. Mia went into a lot of things, and I just want to be the butter that glues it together.
Thank
So
you
if
very
you're
much.
not doing those things, you're not an ally.
There was two things I don't want to let hang. One was the question about, is it ever appropriate as in trying to be an ally to ask someone, a coworker, whether they are trans? And my answer would be no. You can make yourself someone who they feel safe and comfortable to let know that they're trans at some point, because you're posting your pronouns, because you're talking in a way that shows that you're supportive and an ally. But to ask someone if they're trans, and it's interesting, I do a lot of training of judges, and one of the things that I train them on trans issues is one, respect. Asking someone how they'd wish to be addressed is a sign of respect, and it's supported by the judicial canons and all of that. But it might be different depending on who's before you. And if you ask someone who is on your court calendar with a male name, who walks in and address long hair, makeup, how they wish to be addressed, they're going to feel really honored that you care and that you're asking. If you have someone walk in with a woman's name, short hair, business suit, etc., and you ask how they want to be addressed, you might be offending a lesbian who identifies with the subculture of butch. So it's, the best thing to do is to just make yourself clearly someone who is supportive. Someone asked in the chat, where's the line between honoring pronouns and outing someone? If someone tells you their pronouns, but they don't have it on public facing identification, then what is or isn't appropriate? And you know what? There are times it's appropriate to ask. When that person tells you their pronouns, it might be appropriate to say, is it okay for me in other settings to use that? Just, I think, asking the questions at the right time. It's not always going to the trans person as the trans person and suddenly they're the only trans person and asking them all the questions. But there are appropriate times to be asking a question and letting someone know what their preference is on how they want to be treated and addressed. Last thought, I'm going to go with Ellie, since you were the last one to speak. Any last parting words? You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Sorry, yes. We lawyers have an obligation to make the world a better place. It is part of our profession. It's part of our DNA. It's actually part of our oaths. And so I would urge everyone here to understand that the trans community, that your trans colleagues, that people who have come out or people who are struggling to come out, people who are trying to live their lives authentically, help them, understand about them, advocate for us, and advocate, as Mia said, for all people who are other in our society. We have an obligation, legal colleagues, to do this. Thank you.
And on that note, thank you for joining us for this free webinar. We'd also like to express our gratitude to this esteemed group of panelists. You are all doing such critical work, and we thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to share your experience and your expertise. The Commission provides free webinars and resources for legal professionals and advocates nationwide. We hope this helps you in your work. And again, if you can, please consider joining and becoming active in the ABA. You can do so at ambar.org, ambar.org. You can find information on other free programs on the SOGI Commission's webpage. And I just have to say that I think that dialogue and communication is so crucial, and sharing individual experiences is the best way that we can learn about each other and from each other. Best luck to all of you in your work. Stay safe, everybody, and thank you again for participating.